Meeting of Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:50 p.m. Friday at 5:30 p.m. on Friday, May 18th, 2021, virtually in room 137 of the Edison Building, with colleagues participating electronically in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.021 until further notice. Members of the public are currently not permitted to attend these meetings physically due to COVID-19 pandemic recommendations. Interested members of the public are welcome and encouraged to view this meeting remotely at youtube.com/ISD535, where the live stream video may be found. We acknowledge that RPS sites are situated on ancestral lands of the Dakota people. We acknowledge and honor the Dakota nations and the sacred land of all Indigenous peoples. Present at this meeting are school board members, Mr. Michael Munoz, a non-voting ex officio member, and Assistant Board Clerk, Ms. Michelle Severson. Ms. Severson, would you please call the roll?
Chair Marvin, I think as clerk, I'm going to call the roll for this meeting.
Thank you, Clerk Amundson.
Thank you. Clerk Amundson is here. Director Barlow.
Here.
Director Garcia. Director McLaughlin.
Here.
Chair Marvin.
Here.
Vice Chair Nathan.
Here.
Treasurer Workman.
Here.
One more time for Director Garcia.
And Clerk Amundson, I think she was going to have difficulty joining this evening, so she may or may not be able to meet with us.
Very good.
Thank you for that, though. 2.01, approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, policy and procedure briefing items have been added to the agenda as items 8.03 to 8.12, and item 5.02 has been removed from the agenda.
Thank you.
Move approval. Second.
Thank you. The motion's been moved and seconded. And Clerk Amundson, can you clarify, will you be doing the clerking for the meeting?
Yes, because while Ms. Severson is trying to be here, internet is spotty, so it would be best if, for consistency, if I just called all the rolls.
Excellent, and thank you for stepping up.
Yep. So Director Amundson says aye. Director Barlow.
Aye.
Director Garcia. Director McLaughlin.
Aye.
Director Marvin.
Aye.
Director Nathan.
Aye.
Director Workman.
Aye.
Thank you.
3.01, Cradle to Career update. This is an information item. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time I'm going to turn it over to Julie Brock, Executive Director of Cradle to Career, to give us an update. Julie.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Munoz and the board. It's so good to see you this evening. Cradle to Career has been busy. I'm going to share my screen very quickly for you. And we're going to talk a little bit about, once it comes up, here we go. Now, can everyone see that? What do you see?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so Cradle to Career, again, just to very quickly give an oversight for anyone joining the call who hasn't met us before. We're a community-wide, community-owned initiative working with organizations across the community to ensure that children receive the resources they need when they need them to be successful academically and beyond. So one of our networks called Kindergarten Readiness is working on a strategy that they co-created with their stakeholders. Parents and caregivers indicated that they did not feel like they had enough information to understand how to make sure that their child has what they need in order to be successful hitting kindergarten doors. So they have created what we call the Kindergarten Readiness cards. These cards are based on the standard teaching gold methodology, which this methodology really looks at different domains of learning for a child. So the cognitive development, approaches to learning, social, emotional, physical and motor development, and language and literacy. So we have developed, the experts within Standards Learning Gold have created cards, a deck of cards that will actually be placed in the hands of parents and caregivers that provide activities that are either skills that will help with development, they indicate why the activity is important, and then the materials they need to do that activity. And so here is an example of a card. So crafting numbers. So we're going to be working on recognizing numbers. We're going to be manipulating things, and you're going to need some paper and some crayons to do this activity. And so this is an example of a card. We've been piloting these in with focus groups of parents and caregivers. We piloted with English speakers. We hope to pilot with other home language speakers. We have these translated in Somali, Arabic, Spanish, as well as English. So once those pilots are done and those cards are printed, we'll be excited to partner with the district as well as our other network partners to get these in the hands of parents and caregivers, grandparents, anyone who is interacting with kids, so that they have what they need to know that confidently that the activities that they're doing with their kids may look like play, but they're actually things that are really helping them be prepared for kindergarten. And so I'm going to unshare my screen, and if there's any questions, please, I will answer those right now.
Any questions, board members?
Yes, I have one.
Mr. Barlow.
Good evening, Julie. For the parents, grandparents, care providers, how do they get their hands on these wonderful teaching, learning materials?
And we are going to, we're going to have actually another campaign much similar to what we did with Support Your Local Learner. So we're hoping that there's going to be a PSA component to that. We're still working on that. And then we're going to have access through our website where there'll be in PDF downloadables, but also we'll have physical cards that are printed that we will distribute through our partners. And so most likely we'll be working specifically with community engagement and family engagement with the district to figure out a plan as to how we can get these into the hands of students. Hopefully there'll be a way that we can do like Kit Back to School, since kids are coming back, and we can like help equip kids and family members to feel excited about learning.
And so as a brief follow-up, so those who may be listening tonight, when's the earliest they could possibly put their hands on these materials? Say, if they wanted to swing by United Way, would they be able to do so?
Absolutely. We are hoping to have our finalized cards available July 1. So like I said, we're doing some pilot groups right now, some focus groups right now to make sure that they work well for parents and they are addressing what they need. And so we'll make those adjustments first, because as we know in education, sometimes we can get kind of jargony and we can put words in there that maybe needs to be translated into regular English. So we're working with parents and caregivers to make sure that those cards are usable and understandable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. McLaughlin.
Director Barlow took my first question, but I thought of another one.
Okay.
What age ranges would you recommend these for?
So these will be, they're really geared for probably 2.5, 3, 4, and 5. So really those 3 prime ages. And you know, a great place for parents to start thinking about this is we know that it's really important for students to be screened for school and have their preschool screening by age 3. And what that does is that affords 2 years of intervention, and intervention is just that heavy word for like intentional play or intentional interaction to address these domains. And so I would say it'll be really fantastic to partner also with our partners who offer these screenings to make sure that when you get your kid screened at 3, you get a deck of cards.
And Ms. Amundson.
Ms. Brock, are there things that we as school board members can do for you, or perhaps volunteers out in the community who are listening to assist with this or any other initiative?
Absolutely. So I think spread the word. First and foremost, if you can let people know that these cards are going to be available, share those with your friends and your families and your neighbors. You can pick up some cards for, neighborhood night out for August and give them to your neighborhoods. A little tongue-in-cheek, but no, really, that's a good idea. We should do that. And then the second piece is for volunteers. We will actually be looking for volunteers, especially folks who in their workplace. Are there folks in your workplace, your colleagues that you work with or next to, that you would be willing to pick up a deck of cards and get them into their hands, or let them know that these resources exist? So we will be wanting to work through just a community-wide effort to make sure that anyone who interacts, whether they're a grandparent, an auntie, a family friend, we call that family in my house, who's working with a kid between ages 2.5 to 5, or just right there in that sweet spot right before they enter into kindergarten, so up into 6 for some families, they have access to these cards.
Thank you. Any other questions, board members? Ms. Brock, you always bring us good news, and your enthusiasm is contagious, so thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just feel for all my education friends, all of them. So thank you for serving our kids in a really crazy year. And thank you for your leadership, because I just know that I've never watched so many educators and education leaders pivot so many times without a basketball in your hands. So way to do that without traveling. Nicely done. And thank you. Thank you for fighting for our kids. I so appreciate you.
Good metaphor there, too. Thank you very much. All right, we will move on to 3.02 National Merit Scholarship Award. This is an information item. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jackie Peterson, Executive Director of Elementary and Secondary Education. Jackie.
Good evening, board members, Superintendent Munoz. I'm bringing you more good news. As you know, we have so many amazing kids in our school district, and it's my pleasure tonight to share with you just some of them. This time of year, we typically will bring our National Merit Scholars, those who can make it to the board meeting in person. And since we could not do that this year due to COVID, we worked with all 3 high schools to put together a PowerPoint for you so you can see their faces and see their plans for the coming school year. So I am going to just share my screen and share this PowerPoint with you. And I've got it set to auto play. So are you seeing the PowerPoint? Hopefully we're seeing it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, sit back and enjoy.
There we go.
And those are the 19 finalists this year. That's, I think, about 6 more than we had last year, and several commended students that you saw at the end of the PowerPoint. So we want to congratulate all those students, and also thank their counselors for their dedication to catching up with all these kids to get those pictures and their plans for the coming year.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow.
Yes, Jackie. For students and or parents who are very intrigued by how does one become a National Merit Scholar, when should a student begin that process or that journey, how can one prepare, what resources are available, or what supports can be provided? Can you maybe speak to that briefly, if you don't mind?
Sure. I had to do a little research myself because I was not a National Merit Scholar when I was in high school.
Nor I.
Nor you. But I did research a teeny bit, and I would encourage people to look at the website for National Merit Scholar to get a whole lot of information, but it starts with standardized tests. And the school counselors can provide a lot of information. So if students or parents are wanting to learn more about how they can participate and work through that process, they should see their guidance counselor and get all that great information.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. And to our winners, and you are amazing winners. If you were in the boardroom right now, you would be getting a standing ovation. So congratulations, well done. You have amazing futures ahead of you, and you're going to make this place a better place for everyone. So congratulations. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
4.0, consent agenda. Are there any items to be removed for separate consideration? Seeing none.
Move approval, Workman.
Nathan.
Thank you. It's been
Second, Nathan.
It's been moved and seconded. Ms. Amundsen, would you call the roll?
Yes. Director Barlow,
Aye.
Director Garcia, Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Marvin,
Aye.
Director Nathan,
Aye.
Director Workman,
Aye.
Director Amundsen. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you. And Superintendent Munoz.
Yes, we have retirements tonight. The first one is Christine Segrist, receptionist secretary at Bishop Elementary. She's been with the district 12 years. Richard Dawson, special education paraprofessional at Mayo High School, has been with the district 5 years. And Julie Walston, secondary paraprofessional at Willow Creek Middle School, has been with the district 5 years. We thank these individuals for their service to our district.
Thank you. 5.01, Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This is an information item. Superintendent Munoz.
Yes, Will, if you could turn your camera on. This is, I'd like to introduce to you, Will Ruppin is our new Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And okay. Will, if you're on, turn your camera on. There he is. We would like to congratulate Will. Will's been with the district since 2006. He's been a teacher at Riverside Elementary and Lincoln K-8. Recently was the community schools facilitator at Gage Elementary. So we're excited to work with Will at the cabinet level, and excited for the work that he's going to do and help the district move forward with our equity work. So Will, if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you for bringing my name forward for consideration. I'm excited to be a part of this leadership team, and I'm even more excited to continue working for the students, staff, and families of Rochester Public Schools. So thank you to everyone.
On behalf of the school board, Will, congratulations. You have, since you've come to the school district, you've been a huge asset for the staff, for the students, and we just couldn't be more thrilled that you're going to continue working with all of us and helping make this district better. You're a born leader, and thank you for saying yes. All right, and you're also getting a standing ovation. You're not, but you would be if you were here. So there's that. All right, we will go to 5.03, middle school 6th grade orientation day. This is a briefing item. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, I'm going to turn this over to Jackie Peterson, Executive Director of Elementary and Secondary Education. Jackie.
Thank you, board members, Superintendent Munoz. I don't have a big presentation for you. I did put an outline of what the secondary or middle school administrators are requesting you consider, and that is they're calling it Meet Me in the Middle, which I guess we're all a little bit out of it these days because we did not realize that was the name of a song, but maybe that's in our favor too. As you may recall, in April when we rolled into in-person learning with our secondary students, we did implement an orientation day at middle school, similar to what high school has done for many, many years, which is to bring their 9th graders in, just 9th graders for the first half of the day to give them a chance to get oriented to the building and do some activities with students from upper grade levels. Middle school did the same thing. They brought their 6th graders in for the first day, solo. They also included students who had never been in the building, who may have been in 7th grade and never had a chance to be in the building in the past, or students brand new to the school community. So it was really designed for kids who were getting to know the building. They did have some gatherings so that they could share information about the building and hints and tips for navigating the building. They spent a lot of time doing some of the things that we know cause a lot of anxiety, like opening lockers and traveling between classes without being late. And they did some team building things with the kids with students from 7th and 8th grade. And we had really great positive feedback from that, from staff, from students, from parents, that it was a nice way for kids who were feeling anxious to get really into the swing of things. As you know, some of our kids participate in the middle school, what we used to call a middle school prep program, but not all kids are able to or choose to do that. So this is a way to really start kids out on the right foot and really get kids established in the routines. So the middle school principals are asking for you to consider and approve doing that exact thing as we start the next school year in the fall, that we would invite our 6th grade students and students new to the building to come for that first day. And unlike the high school, it needs to be a full day just because our middle school kiddos are a little less mobile in terms of being able to come midday. Like our students, our older students at high school. So this is similar to, I guess you would call it maybe a step into learning only for 6th graders. So that's what is that we're presenting to you tonight to consider. And I would open it up for any questions you might have at this point.
Director Workman.
Yes, so I'm assuming that 7th and 8th graders then would start their first day of school on the second day?
They absolutely would, unless they are some of those kids where you rely on to be there to do activities. Correct, yes.
Okay. This looks like just a really wonderful list of activities, and I'm sure the 6th grade students and any others new to the building are really going to appreciate having some hand-holding and some tender, loving care and all of those other things that are so important for students. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? The only one I have is, you said Meet Me in the Middle as a song. Is there any chance you could sing it, possibly?
You know, there's one cabinet member who has a beautiful singing voice, and it's not me.
Oh.
And I don't know if that person will come forward, but she does like to have a song for every kind of situation. Maybe someday she'll sing for you.
That would be great. If there are no other questions, this is a briefing item, and I'm guessing that you would just as soon have us move it to action.
We would just
I'd like to move this to action.
Well, there you go.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to move this to action. Ms. Amundson.
Director Garcia, Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Marvin,
Aye.
Director Nathan,
Aye.
Director Workman,
Aye.
Director Amundson, aye. Director Barlow.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say we appreciate that, just so we can inform parents as soon as possible. As we know, they may need to make some plans if they have 7th and 8th graders in their family. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll actually vote on it now, too. So then it's official. No, but you know how this is going to go. Okay, here's the resolution. Be it resolved that School Board of Independent School District 535 approves the request to implement an orientation day at all RPS middle schools on the first day of school, fall 2021.
Move approval.
Move approval.
Workman.
Second, Nathan.
It's been moved and seconded. Director Amundson.
Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
Director Marvin,
Aye.
Director Nathan,
Aye.
Director Workman,
Aye.
Director Amundson, aye. Director Barlow,
Aye.
Director Garcia. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jackie. Under efficient and effective operations 7.01, approval of the interim superintendent. This is a briefing item. We're pleased to announce the school board has contracted with Dr. Kent Pickell to be Rochester Public Schools interim superintendent beginning July 1st. Negotiations with Dr. Pickell, who was offered the position last Thursday night, went smoothly and quickly. We look forward to welcoming him to our school district. The public may note that the last time I checked, the contract and some other information is not yet on board docs. This was a very quick turnaround, have the contract agreed upon and signed, and they accomplished that today. So we will have that information available to the public. But at this point, if a board member would like to move this to action, and then after that, if there's any discussion you'd like to have, we can entertain that.
I'd like to move this to action. Workman.
Second, Amundson.
Thank you. And Director Amundson, would you call the roll?
Director Marvin,
Aye.
Director Nathan,
Aye.
Director Workman,
Aye.
Director Amundson, aye. Director Barlow,
Aye.
Director Garcia, Director McLaughlin.
Aye.
Thank you. And here's the resolution. I'll read the resolution and then we'll have time for discussion. Be it resolved, the School Board of Independent School District 535 approves the contract of employment, including a gross annual salary of $223,000 for Dr. Kent Pickell to serve as the interim superintendent of schools for the Rochester Public Schools, effective July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022.
Move approval.
Move approval. Workman.
Second, Nathan.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Bob.
So for the viewing public, they may hear that number, $223,000. Can you share briefly how that figure may have been arrived at, and is this consistent with the par for the course, so to speak?
It is. Again, our school board had a conversation with the board attorney, Mr. Walsberger, who typically does the superintendent contracts. This is less than the current superintendent is earning, but it's well within the parameters of what a superintendent for a district this size, and with the expertise that Dr. Pickell has, would expect to earn.
Thank you.
Any other questions for? All right, then. I think we are ready to vote. Director Amundson.
Director Nathan,
Aye.
Director Workman,
Aye.
Director Amundson, aye. Director Barlow,
Aye.
Director Garcia, Director McLaughlin,
Aye.
and Director Marvin.
Aye. Thank you. And Dr. Pakel, if you're listening, congratulations. We really look forward to working with you. All right. 7.02, a referendum update. This is an information item. Superintendent Munoz.
Yes, at this time, I'll turn it over to Scott Sheridan, Executive Director of Operations, and he can introduce the guest that he has with him. Scott?
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, board members. Tonight is the 18th update, referendum update. And tonight we're focusing on the Century Pool design and budget. With me tonight is Dana Haliptek from WSN. He's one of the lead design architects for all the pool projects. Also with us tonight from Knutson Construction is Delbert Feenstra, who is the estimator, Kean McWaters, who you know from prior contact, Tyler Lenzner as well. I assume you remember he's managing the pool. And Knutson Construction is the construction manager agent for many of the projects that we're doing during the referendum. Also with us is Rich Schaefer from US Aquatics, who's part of the design team as well. So I'll turn it over to Dana first, who's going to provide you with an update on the design for Century Pool.
Thank you, Scott. Before I get started, I just want to kind of give a little bit of an update on where we have been since our last presentation to the school board. Since our last meeting, our design team has made a trip up to Sibley High School, where we toured their new pool. We got a lot of good information from that meeting. We brought that back, and since then we have had 4 coaches meetings and 1 with the adaptive programs. Those coaches meetings were used to gain insight from our coaches as we move through the design process. Those are very valuable meetings. We made several design changes based off of their needs for offices, locker rooms, training, deck space, and so forth. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you a couple of the design changes that we've had recently. Okay, there we go. So you can see this is the new and revised site plan that you're looking at right now. The yellow or the green box in the center is the scope of the addition or the expansion with the 8-lane stretch, and then the modifications or the changes to the road. You can see that wrapping around the north side. When we looked at the design of the building on the exterior, we looked at some of the existing materials, the masonry, the precast, and how the addition would impact the existing building. You can see here, I'm just drawing my hand here around the footprint or around the shell of the proposed pool. You notice we put a sloped roof on that. That sloped roof is there by design, as we're trying to be efficient with every dollar that we spend on this project. Every decision that we make is based on how does that impact our overall project cost and our project scope. And so sloping the roof, even though it looks pretty minimal, we reduce the overall height of the walls, the precast walls on the west side. And then by doing that, we saved, I believe, approximately $100,000. I'll let Dilbert talk about that in a minute. The overall floor plan, as you can see, let me zoom in just a little. There we go. Now it's clear. The yellow being the common corridors. The blue obviously is the swimming pool. So when I talk about decisions that were made, the width of the decks on the east, west, and north side is 10 feet and 16 feet on the south side. Those are the minimum deck widths that we determined would be the most efficient based on the number of swimmers that we have using the pool at one time, as well as locker rooms. The pre-race gathering area, again, that would be a part of our storm shelter component, which is required by the state. the locker rooms, the men's and women's restrooms, family restrooms, pool storage, coaches' offices, as well as pool mechanical and our mechanical rooms specifically for this addition. The second floor, I shouldn't say second floor, the seating level for the pool, we are seating approximately 400 in the elevated pool seating, which you can see on the right-hand side is the yellow. When we talk about decisions that are being made, the one decision that we have here is to provide alternate seating, an alternate which would be located on the south side and on the north side. So we would, at this time, we're bidding those seating components as an alternate. So if we don't have, or if our budget isn't as friendly as we'd like it to be, then we can remove these seating components, or we can add those in later. But that'll be identified as one of our alternates for the project. So our core seating then would be then from where my hand is here on the north side to the south side, with the entry to the natatorium being on the very far south as we come from the existing corridor right there. There we go. So we come in from the corridor from the south, come into a small gathering space within the natatorium, and from there we can go up with an accessible lift or stairs, which brings us up to the seating along the east side. When we look at the design of the building, one second, here we go. I'm going to look at the top section first. Now this is cutting a section east-west, so when we talk about sloping that ceiling, this is what the impact is on the inside of the pool. And so what you see here is that red line and that hatch, and this is the minimum clearance required for 1 meter diving boards on the south end of the pool. So when we look at our roof slope, we slope that in a way where we could lower the west wall to help with our budget, as well as still provide for diving clearances for 1 meter diving boards. And then of course you can see the elevated seating area on it'd be the east side of the natatorium here. And then another cross section looking to the east, obviously the pool section, and then you can see the seating in the background and how that's elevated above the pool deck. Go back to the exterior there. And then let me just zoom in here. Let me show you this. This is a nice view of the natatorium and the impact of the seating. Again, the alternate seating on the north, alternate seating on the south, and then the base seating in the center of the natatorium with the pool in the center, obviously. And if there's no questions, I can turn this over to Tyler and the Knutson team to discuss schedule and budgets.
Delbert, do you want to take it if there's no questions here?
I think you're on mute, Delbert.
How about now?
There you go.
All right, very good. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So we'll try that again. So here's the budget for the project as Dana has it drawn. Everyone wants to jump right down to the bottom line. We're just over $15,400,000. I took the drawings that Dana has generated, along with cut sheets and narratives regarding the mechanical and electrical systems. Did a full quantity takeoff on all of the building systems and reached out to subcontractors and vendors locally to validate all of our pricing, and developed the price that way. You can see but in the middle of the page there, I'm projecting our construction cost to be $11,137,000. I'm still carrying a 4% estimating contingency. And you might ask yourself, well, if you've quantified all the building components and reached out to vendors and stubs to verify the pricing, why are we still carrying over $400,000 in contingency? And the reason for that is market volatility on raw materials. Just since the first of the year, a 16-foot long 2x4 has gone from $17 to $27. And a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood that we would use for say, building formwork for the concrete footings or temporary enclosing the building as we progress has gone from $37 back in January to now $90 to $100, depending on where we find it, and they're rationing it when we do go buy it because there's a lack of supply. And I'm getting daily emails regarding these price increases and material shortages. Some of it has to do with COVID, some of it has to do with other areas of the nation are really ramping up building wood structures. And although concrete has stayed fairly flat, as people run short of 2x4s and plywood to build their stuff, there's going to be a shortage of concrete and concrete block as well. So I'm anticipating those costs are anticipated to rise over the next several months. Now, this is still a work in progress. We still have, and Tyler can talk a little bit more about the schedule, 6 or 8 weeks of design before we put this out to bid. And all of the vendors and subcontractors that I talked to and confirmed that the pricing with this week are telling me that the numbers are only good for a week or two. They themselves, as I mentioned, are getting notices daily about shortages and price increases. Below the 11 million, you can see all the soft costs that go into the project. There's a construction contingency of 3%. We'll maintain that through the project, just like we have in all the other projects for the Rochester Public Schools. And then you can see there the general conditions, the design fees, and all of the remaining city fees that bring us to the $15,400,000. That's a quick overview of the project. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions.
Board members, any questions so far?
Director Marvin, I'll let Director Edmondson go first. I'm just trying to raise my hand.
You can go ahead.
Okay. So Dana, I just had one question. Well, my first question on the design was the alternate seating that you said could be done depending on the cost. How many more seats would that add?
That's a really good question, and I apologize, I don't have those numbers right in front of me at this time. Our total seating for the natatorium was 400 seats, including the alternates.
There's about 65 seats we figure would be the alternate. The base is going to be the 335.
Thank you, Delbert.
Great. 65. Okay.
Also, with bidding as alternates, we figure the value of those seats is probably around $20,000, $20,000 to $25,000. There also will be an alternate for deck showers. We figure that's probably $50,000 to $80,000. And then there was a third. What was the third? Oh no, we took it. Never mind.
So those would be alternate bids that you'd include in the bid package.
Yes, they'd be alternate ads, so that if everything comes in well, and we're under the budget, we don't use any of that $400,000. We'll use some of that $400,000 to pay for those ads.
Okay. And then one more question for Dana. You mentioned that you had made some design decisions to minimize the costs, like sloping the roof. Were there any other major components that you could highlight for us where you made choices that were particularly related to minimizing cost?
The sloping the roof was probably the largest option or the largest decision that was made in multiple levels, because it affects mechanical systems. Because by reducing the volume, you reduce the amount of air, which reduces the number of mechanical units. So it's kind of a snowball effect on how that sloped roof is impacted by more than just the structure height, but more of the mechanical system as well. When we
also reduced the amount of seating. We eliminated a row of seating.
Yep.
For a couple of reasons. One, that helped us get the roof height down. Two, that helped us reduce the size, of the storm shelter, which made the footprint smaller, and got us closer to, my understanding was the actual seating that's at the Sibley pool that we're using as the model.
Correct. And then by also reducing the number of seats, it reduced the number of occupants in the building, and that again, in turn, reduced the size of the storm shelter requirements. It reduced the number of toilet fixtures that are required, and so all of that sort of, again, it sort of snowballs when you make one decision to remove 100 seats, how that impacts the entire structure and everything that it's associated with, including the number of toilets that are required. So we reduce those down to the minimum number as well as required by code.
Dana, can you also share any changes that were made prior to the decision to add the stretch pool? So, was there change in the deck size and any other that had to be reduced when we switched to the stretch pool?
Okay, right. So when we had just the 8-lane stretch, we did have larger decks, larger pool decks all the way around the pool to accommodate more teams. So when we went to the 8-lane stretch and we're looking at, how we're going to minimize the impact of the cost of the 8-lane stretch, that's, absolutely. Reducing the deck size down to 10 foot on 3 sides and 16 foot behind the boards. That was a key factor in trying to minimize the square footage. I mean, to reduce costs, the best way to do that is to reduce square footage. So we have streamlined, and I mean streamlined in every sense of the imagination, as far as corridor widths, number of toilet fixtures, like again, the deck size. You reduce that square footage, and we're even squeezing our pool equipment room and mechanical rooms to minimum sizes. And we're using 3D software. We're using Revit software to design the mechanical system, so we can best streamline the design of the piping and the ducting within those rooms, even to make those as most efficient as possible. But yeah, when we had just the 8-lane pool, we did have a larger deck size around the outside to accommodate more teams at that point. And then we also had 500 seats at that point as well. So we reduced that by 100 seats.
A couple other items we also looked at were the below deck lane rails. I don't know if Dana, if you want to hit on that one.
Oh, yeah, right. So there's the below deck lane reels. What that is, it's basically a plastic or resin product that's buried and it's installed underneath the deck of the pool. So when you pull the lane lines off, they would roll down into a cavity basically underneath the pool deck. So by eliminating those, we're eliminating additional plumbing. We're eliminating obviously the units that those would roll into, and instead they would be put onto basically like large rolls or rollers or storage units, and that would be then rolled into the pool storage rooms that we have available.
And then one other big item we looked at was the acoustical ceilings.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you. So we removed all of the acoustical ceilings actually out of the space, out of the corridors, out of the locker rooms, and the only actual acoustical treatments that we're using are just in the natatorium, and that would be obviously for for acoustics when you have large crowds in there and swimmers and athletes, you're going to want some noise control or some acoustical control. But we did remove the ceilings, and so we're just going to go with an exposed structure in the corridors and in the locker rooms as well.
Which also matches Sibley, correct?
That's correct, yep.
Ms. Amundson, you have a question.
Thank you. So it's clear that we have a very solid design and that everyone has been extremely creative and resourceful in coming up with this. I know the pool community maybe has a grander vision, and it sounds like a good in the middle, to call back to the song that we were just talking about, Meet Me in the Middle. It sounds like we've met them in the middle as much as is possible due to the budget. But that being said, could you comment on some of the things that we were not able to do that the pool community might have been asking for? And is there any way that you can think of, I'm thinking about specifically the acoustical tiles, which could be an enhancement in future years, perhaps, or is this the type of thing that once it's done and designed, it's going to have to stay that way? And are there other things like maybe the storage area that we'd be able to add on at a future time should our projects allow a budget for that type of thing in the future? Okay,
so that's some good questions. Yeah, so in working with the coaches, there has been push and pull. There has to be. There's a checks and balances between the contractors, the architects, the RPS facilities folks, as well as with the coaches, and we're always checking each other and pushing back. And that's a really good question. One of them was on the west side of the natatorium. We want to incorporate some low, maybe a 2-level bleacher system where you see that 10'2" deck, the pool deck right in this area here. We want to include a small bleacher area there for the athletes as they're, between meets and between events. But in order to incorporate that, we would increase our total deck occupancy, because by putting bleachers in, you're now adding additional occupants. So what we've done is we've accommodated for that within the storm shelter. So instead of taking additional square footage out of the storm shelter, right now we're going to plan on future seating or future bleachers on the west side of the pool deck, and we're going to accommodate that by keeping the additional 500 square feet within the storm shelter. So if those bleachers are added later, we don't have a problem with our storm shelter down the road, and we're not going to get ourselves into a situation where we're going to wish we had that additional 500 square feet. So that's one thing where, we can't provide the bleachers today, but we're providing the storm shelter to accommodate it in the future. I don't know if that answered your question or not. I think you had a couple pieces there.
It does. That's exactly the type of thing I'm thinking of. Are there other things like that we could plan for and allow for, storage areas, the acoustical tiles, anything else that we've covered, or anything else that we haven't, for that matter?
We've included the pricing acoustical treatments in the pool area itself, so it will have what's needed to keep the noise and the echoing down. The acoustical tiles he was talking about was in the corridor between the pool and the gym. The corridor now between the cafeteria and the gym has some bulkheads, drywall bulkheads and ceilings, and that could be added later if needed, or if the budget allows.
And I think that also goes to the finishes on the corridor, in the corridor flooring as well, Delbert, where the existing school has a pattern. I don't show it on here, but within that existing corridor, there's a terrazzo pattern, and we're going to stop that pattern at the corridors and go with a different finish within the corridor system from the existing pool. You had mentioned storage. That's a great point. We're trying to get as much storage in there as we can, and one area that we haven't, that we're being very careful with anyway, is underneath the seating. You can see this large gray area right here, which is basically unaccounted for. We still need to provide ducting and air ventilation, which is going to have to happen somewhere. Let me just go right to that spot there. Here we are. So here's our corridor, and adjacent to that we have these available sort of voids is what you see here. But we're going to have to accommodate for our mechanical system. Now our goal is to take basically this front component here underneath the bleachers and provide access from the pool deck for future storage, whether that be for life jackets or for pool noodles or whatever it might be, just to give access there. But first thing we need to do is progress our design even further with the mechanical system, which is being developed right now, and move this mechanical system into these ancillary spaces, and get access out to our rooftop units, and as well as ventilation supply and return. So we're trying to accommodate additional storage underneath there. We really are, but we need to get our mechanical system first. That's number one priority for that space. But if we can allocate that for storage, we're absolutely going to do that. Right now we have a pool storage room right here, and this is bigger than, not double, but it's bigger than what we have seen in Sibley and other similar sized pools. It seems like the pool storage is always takes the biggest hit when it comes to finalizing a plan. So we've tried to accommodate that with as large a space as we can, and then we're going to try to accommodate it again underneath the seating if we can do that.
Director Nathan.
One of the other questions that we have seen from the pool community is the difference between using, you have to tell me the correct name, plaster versus tile for the pool. Is that the interior of the pool and the deck of the pool? Can you tell us which one you chose and what the difference in cost was?
Dilbert?
I'd have to defer to Rick on that. I'm pretty sure we've always priced the tile pool all along, knowing that plaster is not the way to go and not preferred by the district or the community. Rick and his team helped me develop that pool portion of the budget. If you could confirm that. I thought I saw him on the phone earlier.
Yep, I'm here. We commonly do plaster. Tile can be an upgrade. It has future maintenance implications with grout. We just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. We're going to have tile and race lanes no matter what, because you can't do plaster race lanes. The cost is generally very similar.
So which one did we pick then, plaster or tile?
I believe that Rochester had chosen tile.
And Delbert, I really appreciate the itemization of the costs. You're always so specific, even though I don't know what half of the line items actually mean. But my eyes, of course, go to the largest budget items, just to kind of see. I know we've been trying to cut costs, but tell me about line 23 mechanical systems, and that I know you always say that costs so much, but tell me a little bit about why that comes in so high.
So that's your heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, plus all of your plumbing for all the toilets, showers, and the locker room. That cost actually came in a bit higher than I was actually hoping to be able to come to this meeting with a number closer to 15 million. And we had been making cuts and we're tracking that way until I got my confirming budgets from Winona Heat and Vent and Hunt Electric, who have been helping me. The material costs on those units have gone up. Steel is up 30 to 40%, depending on the place. We are going with the underground blue duct for exhausting the chloramine. I think I got the word wrong. The gases, right, that make a pool smell, because that's what's in the best interest of the district. There would be, because steel has come up so far, the savings to keep the exhaust duct above the deck is down. I think before we said it was going to add about $100,000. Now they're saying it's only going to add save $50 or $60,000 versus the underground blue duct. For the value for the money, it's the right, in our opinion, the right thing to do to keep it under the deck. The unit itself that provides the heating, cooling, and dehumidification for the natatorium, the pool area. Because people throw out there, well, you only added 30 feet to the pool or 40 feet to the pool. Why is everything going up so much? Well, in regards to the mechanical system, it's not a one-to-one linear relationship. Yes, we actually added 44 feet to the pool, but because of that water surface area and the amount of humidity it generates and the gases that are required, the mechanical unit doubled in size, or not quite doubled in size, and also doubled in cost. We went from a $300,000 unit roughly to a $650,000 unit, plus the ductwork. That's just the box itself, right? So those are the things that go into that mechanical number. And then electrically, Hunt Electric just did the YMCA pool in Austin. I know that was and did all the lighting and things there, so they've got a good handle and had good contacts for current pricing on lighting systems in a pool. So they were able to help me with a budget there. And again, the lighting controllers and the copper costs and all those things just keep going up on us.
Great. Thank you.
Director Amundson, another question?
Yes, please. This is a small point, but could become a huge headache. It was mentioned to me that there's some concern about where the scoreboard will go with the sloped roof. Do we have a solution for the scoreboard issue? Are we confident that we haven't created a larger problem?
That's actually a very good question, and I tasked my mechanical engineers with coming up with a solution, and let me show you exactly how that's impacted. So as I'm showing this right now, this is a supply duct here, this round duct, and then I have another one on this side, and actually it under the original design it wrapped around the entire pool. And so as you can see, the distance between the pool deck and the bottom of the duct, which is a huge duct, it doesn't leave enough room for a 10-foot screen and then kids standing underneath it. So what I've tasked my team with doing is, what we're going to do is start with this duct here above the seating. We're going to go up into the space of the structure, come across the structure, and stop there. So instead of wrapping around the entire natatorium, we're going to go up into the ceiling space, come across, and then drop down. So instead of having this 60-inch duct at the west side, we're going to put that duct up into this roof space and then have multiple legs going through the roof structure. Now that will eliminate this 60-inch duct here on the end, and will give us approximately, I believe it's 20 feet from the bottom of structure to the top of the pool deck, which would leave us enough room for a 10-foot screen on the end. So that's a very good question, and it's been a challenge to me and my design team on how we're going to save $100,000 by reducing the west wall, but by not interfering with the screen. So we're working on that. We're working through that. And that's a design challenge, and it's a challenge that my team is working through.
For your creativity on that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Nathan, you have another one.
I do, and I don't know, Superintendent, if this is the time to bring up some of the global numbers, but I remember the last time we talked about this, we were talking about the comparisons of what our original pool cost that wasn't a stretch 25 was to some of the other pools like Sibley, and I'm looking at my notes and seeing that the numbers Delbert gave us is that the Sibley pool was about $11,900 for the cost of the pool. The cost of our pool is about $11,100. $11,500, but our all-in costs are $15,400,000, which is more than what I think at the time we talked about potentially having to finance the pool. So is this the right time to talk about the difference between what our estimates are and how much money we have for the pool?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're not looking for the board to vote or take action tonight, but we're hoping to get consensus, at least from the board, that they're comfortable with that number, the 15,400, 15,500. That is over, I think, after the resolution was approved a few months ago on not doing the male pool. All that money went to the Century pool. That gave us a budget of $14 million. This is, over about $1.5 million, but we are confident that we have that in our referendum money to cover that. Not over that amount, but we feel that we can make that 15,400, 15,500 work. What we kind of need to know is if the board is comfortable with that, then they can continue finalizing the design process. But if the board would say, no, you need to get it closer to that 14 million, then they'll have to go back to the drawing board and make some more reductions somewhere else. But in working with John Carlson, our CFO, and looking at our overall referendum funding, we feel that we can cover this additional $1.5 million for the pool project.
So, Superintendent, do you want some feedback from the board now about that cost?
Yeah, because what we don't want them to do when they come back with the final design to go out to bid to say, oh, no, you need to be closer to 14 million. So just consensus by the board that they're comfortable with where we are right now as far as the overall budget for the pool. We still have a few little things that we need to work out, but we just want to make sure that the board's okay with staying right around that 15.4, 15.5, so we don't have to come back and then go back to the drawing board again.
All right, and I see a couple of hands up, but from my perspective, we don't want to go back to the drawing board. You know, with the inflation of costs for materials, the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to get. I think those working on the project have been really careful to be good stewards of the funding that we have. I know you said that we have some referendum money that we can use for this, even though it's more than we originally thought, but it looks to me like it's a quality product. It's going to be exactly what our schools need. So I, for one, would say that it's a good use of our funding, and we should move forward with this. Director Workman.
Yes, I would agree. So long as Mr. Carlson has not gone into panic mode and is continuing to put his stamp of approval on it from a budget perspective, I'm more than confident we can handle it.
Thank you, Director Amundson.
I know this has been covered before, but just to be really clear for those listening, the source of the extra dollars that we're talking about above the 14 would be what source?
It's still it's referendum. It's from the referendum. It's not, we're not going to use general fund or any other funding. It's just part of that overall referendum approval.
So it's not being diverted from something else other than the fact that we've changed our priorities on the Mayo Pool project.
Correct.
Thank you. I'm good.
All right, Director Workman, something else?
No, I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
All right. Oh, sorry, Director Nathan.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I'm good with moving forward, and I would shudder to think what it would mean to have to cut another 1.5 million from the design, given how much has already put into, you know, trying to give us all the features for the budget that we have. So, and Superintendent, I think it's fair to say that the money is also coming from the savings. Well, I guess I'll call it savings from the other projects in our referendum funding, estimate versus actual cost. We've been able to be good stewards of that money, so we have some additional funds available in the referendum budget.
Yeah, that's correct. And then I also hats off to Keenan from Knutson's. He's making sure that our other designers on the other projects are being really efficient with our funding, and he's really allowed us to save some additional funding from the other projects that we can contribute to the Century Pool project.
I'm not hearing any negative feedback from board members, Superintendent Munoz, so I think that it's sort of a thumbs up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, those who are presenting. Are there any other messages you want the board to hear and the community to hear, or are you ready to wrap it up?
I think we're ready to wrap it up, but the next step will be we come back with final design, and then we'll put it out for bid. Kian, do you know what the timeline is for that now?
I'm going to defer that one to Tyler.
Okay, thank you.
Let me get back on here. Roughly we're looking at about 8 weeks. Still got some things we got to work through, but about roughly 8 more weeks, give or take a couple for design before we get it out.
Yeah, initially we had thought about breaking ground in August, but now it kind of looks more like September, more than likely.
Right around there, yep.
Okay, thank all of you very much. Great presentation and incredible work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will move on to 7.03, approval of 2021-2025 coach busing contract with Rochester City Lines. This is a briefing item. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, at this time I'm going to turn it over to Mark Queasley, Activities Director from Century High School. Mark.
Good evening, everyone. Madam Marvin and Mr. Munoz and board members. Before you is our briefing item of a new 4-year contract with Rochester City Lines for our bus service. We do this in conjunction with First Student, but what we're finding in the activities and athletic world is that we do not have enough school buses available, so we are seeing more and more coach buses leave our facilities after school. Just a side note, our primary focus is to transport varsity teams on coach buses of more than 60 miles. But I would say probably in the last 4 years, maybe 2 years before COVID, we were having a hard time getting school bus drivers after school because there weren't enough drivers available to do the routes plus our athletics and activities. So our costs have been going up in this category for us, but we're trying to make sure that, well, coach buses help us because we can get more kids on them. They can study while they're on the buses a little bit easier than they can on a school bus. And there are some benefits to this service for our kids as well. I do anticipate in the future with our new late ending time for our school that we will rely even more on Rochester City Lines because of our school buses will be out doing routes as well. So they've been a great partner for the numerous years for us, and they have some costs that we have to incur in this new budget, but this is our recommendation from Mr. Carlson and I for the next 4 years.
Thank you. Board members, do you have any questions from Mr. Queasley or Mr. Carlson? Mr. Barlow.
Good evening, Mark. Quick question regarding what I will term transportation equity. Okay, what do I mean by that? Are the coach buses, have they in the past been, if you will, shared and or used equally among our high schools? I guess I'm trying to, in my own mind, trying to ensure that JM, I'll just be clear, that JM isn't always getting the school buses, you know, on their 60 miles or out, and Century always getting the coach buses. So can you maybe help me understand the decisions which are made from an activities director's where you said in terms of those decisions and how there will be transportation equity achieved throughout the district for our students needing transportation?
Great question, Mr. Barlow. Yes, when we put out our bus requests, we put them out season by season, sport by sport. And so if it is a varsity program, no matter what the varsity program is, and or what school it is, if it's over 60 miles, it automatically goes to Rochester City Lines. There have been a few occasions where if we have a school bus route that is under 60 miles and the school bus company can't take our team to like Austin because that's under 60 miles, we do have a system where we are rotating that between the three high schools where what next varsity team will get that bus, since there's that shortage. And the secretaries, our assistants are really good at tracking that. So is Rochester City Lines. And so we talk on a weekly basis about making sure we're staying equitable. The other thing that this contract has done the last couple of times that we've renewed it is our activities, whether it's band, orchestra, anybody who wants to take a field trip out of Rochester has the option of the guaranteed price that the athletic department has. And so it has helped fund some of those trips more efficiently as well, so that they're not paying a higher cost by going to a second or third party vendor for those trips. So the price guarantee has helped our activities programs as well. I think I answered that for you.
And you did, thank you.
Yep.
Director Nate.
Mr. Queasley, you said that the last full year we spent about $414,000 on these coach buses. Are you thinking it's going to be about the same utilization rate?
It's hard to say as we're coming out of COVID, Madam Nathan, because we just don't know what we don't know yet. With the shortage of bus drivers and the shortage of coach bus drivers, just this last week, we didn't have enough coach buses even to send some of our varsity teams out. So we ended up sharing a bus between 3 high schools, and in COVID, that's not good for us to be doing. But we needed to be able to have the kids the opportunity to participate. So we're hoping that their inflationary rate is 3% per year of the contract, and they've been pretty true to that for the last several years that we've been using this service.
Anything else, board members? Mr. Queasley, this is a briefing item. Is this something that you would like to get approved sooner rather than later?
It would be great if you would decide to move it forward. The urgency isn't until the 16th of August when we start fall sports. But if you choose to move it forward, that would be fine with us.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move this to action.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to move this to action. Clerk Amundson, would you call the roll, please?
Director Workman?
Aye.
Director Amundson? Aye. Director Barlow?
Aye.
Director Garcia? Director McLaughlin?
Aye.
Director Marvin?
Aye.
And Director Nathan?
Aye.
Thank you. It's an action item. Be it resolved, the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby approve the 2021-2025 coach busing contract with Rochester City Lines.
Move approval, Workman.
Second, Nathan.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. And Clerk Amundson, would you call the vote again?
Director Amundson? Aye. Director Barlow?
Aye.
Director Garcia? Director McLaughlin?
Aye.
Director Marvin?
Aye.
Director Nathan? We couldn't hear you. There you go. And Director Workman?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you. 7.04, approval of boundary adjustments for the 2022-2023 school year is recommended by the Boundary Advisory Committee. This is a briefing item, but just mentioning at the beginning, it is unlikely and probably untoward that we would move this to action tonight, but we do have a report from the Boundary Adjustments Committee. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, I'll turn this over to John Carlson, Executive Director of Business Services. John.
Well, Good evening, Board Chair and Superintendent Munoz. Thank you for allowing us to bring this report to you. This is technically the superintendent's recommendation tonight to change the boundaries as is presented. I will say the superintendent has not made any modifications whatsoever to what the Boundary Advisory Committee recommended to him. So this is straight up from the volunteer committee that has worked on that. We agreed to work with Cooperative Strategies, so that's the gentleman you see on the screen, Scott Leopold, Matt Sachs, Rob Olson, back in, I think, November of last year. And they basically ran this process, and from my vantage point as the staff liaison with the Boundary Advisory Committee, they did an outstanding job. They just ran this very professionally and very smoothly, and we got a lot of good feedback from the volunteers that helped on this process. So I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to walk you through the recommendation at this time.
Okay, Matt's going to share his screen, and I'll kind of start the presentation here. Thank you, everybody. I know this has been it's been an emotional process. Boundaries are near and dear to a lot of people, a lot of families. I think one thing that really came out that the committee acknowledged was that everybody really loves their schools, and that's a great problem to have. So it's been, I feel, a transparent process that we've gone through. This is just our agenda for the presentation. We'll just review the process briefly. We'll talk about our community feedback, then we'll get into the recommendation, and we'll talk about our next steps. This is our overall process that we've been following since last fall. We began with that listening tour where we listened to board members, their opinions about the subject. We then got into the details of the analysis, geocoding the students, looking at the existing boundary. We talked about some guiding principles. We had a survey that we sent out to the community at that point to get some feedback around some of those concepts and ideas. We then formed our Boundary Advisory Committee. We used that committee to develop some options. We ran those options through a community outreach process where we had an interactive online survey. We also had the opportunity for folks to participate in focus groups to kind of have that more intimate interaction with the consultants and other, and each other as community members. And here we are with the recommendations. Here's our overall timeline. Again, we started back in October. We kind of hit it hard with the committee, January, February, March, and through April we had 6 total meetings. We had our community feedback and our focus groups on the options in April, and here we are at the end of the process. We did have the ability to kind of stretch out into next year if we needed to, but we wanted to try to get this done so that we could have closure for people so they knew what the boundaries would be like before going into school for next year. Programmatic considerations, this is something that we kind of talked about at the onset of the process. There were some things kind of in play that we wanted to just see what the implications would be as far as the boundaries went. The board didn't give us any definitive direction, but they said that we kind of had the freedom to look at these as we were developing boundaries. The first piece that we were looking at was making Churchill a K-5 walk-only boundary and moving moving the Montessori program to Hoover and having it be a dedicated facility for that district-wide option. If you recall the options that we presented, we modeled this in option 2. Ultimately, this didn't make it into the recommendation because of some of the implications that occurred with Ben Franklin. The utilization was really low once we took that program out of it. And we also had the expansion of the Longfellow there, and it just left it as the utilization at Franklin was just a little low. I believe it was 54%. Longfellow, this would be a combination of a walking boundary and a district-wide option. We do have a walking boundary for Longfellow in the recommendation. And then Spanish immersion, we talked about perhaps moving that from Gage to Bishop. In the recommendation, it remains at Gage. And the Newcomer Academy, we talked about moving it from Riverside to Bamber Valley, and it remains at Riverside in the recommendation. Just a little refresher on the Boundary Advisory Committee. They were a great group, very engaged as we went through the process. It was not a decision-making group, but is representative of the community. They were intended to provide feedback throughout the process and help us interpret feedback from the broader community. Roles and objectives, we tasked them with keeping an objective view, considering the needs of all students, providing feedback during the options development process, and making recommendations to the district leadership. We had a total of 6 2-hour meetings with some homework in between, and that's the schedule that we kind of followed, pretty much every month, and we did sneak in some additional meetings as needed as we went through that process. I just want to review, this was the feedback from the initial guideline survey that we had, I believe it was before the holidays. We asked the community to select their top 4 guiding principles that were most important to them. We didn't ask them to be objective. We just wanted to kind of see how the community would react to this. This kind of gave the committee a barometer to how the community may react to certain types of options. The community really valued attempting to create boundaries that assign students to their closest school, wanted to maximize walkability, minimize busing, aligning feeder patterns is important, attempting, creating boundaries that prepare the district to grow with minimal future changes was also important. Next. So as we go into the feedback on the options that we presented, so this is the original options 1, 2, and 3. We had over 2,000 responses to the survey. I think that initially when we did that first survey, we had around 500, and there was some concern, and I said, don't worry, we'll get plenty of response when we have options that are actually moving the lines around. So we had over 2,000 responses to the survey, which I felt was a good number. We had 6 different focus group sessions that we held between April 13th and April 15th, in which over 40 people participated, and those were held over Zoom. As you can see on this chart here, the overall survey responses to those initial 3 options, so option 1, almost 60% of the participants opposed it, a little, around 75 or around 25% supported it. We've got, some that were in the middle that were neutral. Option 2, a little bit more support, little more than 50%, and option 3 really had the most support overall. Some consistent overall comments. Again, people love their schools; they don't want to change. Proximity to school was the most important. There was a perceived impact on home values. There was concerns around disrupting current middle school to high school feeder traditions, specifically athletics. There were also concerns about siblings in different schools. Hundreds of comments about implementation and granting exceptions to the boundary changes. Those are just kind of some consistent comments that we kind of saw throughout all 3 options. Next. So this is option 1. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but the map on the left shows you what the boundaries looked like for option 1. The background shaded areas are the elementary zones. The purple lines are the high school zones, and the orange lines on top are the middle school zones, so that you can really see all 3 levels at the same time. That kind of heat map that you see on there, we were actually able to geocode the comments that people submitted on the survey and identify some hot spots or a heat map to really see spatially what people's thoughts looked like. This is a tool that we gave to the committee so that they could drill down into it. They could click on a spot and they could scroll through all the comments associated with that. We were able to do that based on the street name that people provided on the survey. And if they didn't provide a street name and they provided a school, we put the comment on the school. And then you see that little blip there kind of in the northeast outside of the district boundary. For those comments that did not provide a school or a street address, we just placed them on that point outside the district so that the committee could again see that. Overall response to option 1, negative comments around the Falwell area feeding into John Adams Middle School and John Marshall High School. There were transportation concerns with the vertical nature of the middle school boundaries. So in this scenario, we had all of Bishop going to the new middle school and then back to Mayo for high school. And so it just seemed like some back and forth. And again, you can see that overall response was about 60% negative. So here's option 2. Just as a refresher, option 2, this was the option that did move the Montessori program to Hoover and made that walk zone for Churchill. Overall, on negative comments here, that wasn't well received in the Churchill-Hoover area. I think some of it may have been some of the other changes that were made to align the feeder patterns. We had some areas that were moved from the current Churchill-Hoover boundary into Elton Hills, John Adams and John Marshall, and that wasn't well received. There were a lot of positive comments around the socioeconomic balance, but the areas that were impacted to achieve this were not supportive of that. Overall, you can see, a little over 50% support, about 44% opposition to that. Moving on to option 3. I think this is interesting to kind of look at the heat map of the comments. If you look kind of on the northwest of the district, we have that kind of cutout that we had there for, it's a part that is currently east of 52 that is currently going to Century, and this option we had it at John Marshall. A lot of comments there, and that's something that we were actually able to remedy in the recommendation. I would say that there was more support due to less impact at the high school level on option 3, and so we had near 60% support for option 3 overall. But you can kind of see some of those hot spots are kind of in the same area. So moving on. As we went to develop the recommendations, we actually sent all the community feedback to the committee prior to any discussions. So we didn't just present this information to them and expect them to have a fruitful discussion that same day. We sent it to them, I think, 4 or 5 days ahead of time. We had 2 full meetings we had one meeting where we really reviewed the feedback, and then we had another meeting where we really kind of got into the nuts and bolts of the recommendations. Pretty early on, we removed option 1 from consideration just due to the feedback that was received and the demographic imbalance that we had at the middle schools. Option 2 had the best demographic balance at elementary and middle schools, but that low utilization that I talked about a little earlier at Franklin was a challenge. Option 3 had the best overall utilization and the best demographic balance at high schools. Next. So as we started to develop our draft, the committee kind of agreed to use option 3 as a starting point. We made some slight modifications to the high school boundaries that were made, again, based on that community feedback. The overall changes to the high school boundaries are minimal. We had some areas from Mayo and John Marshall, to Century. Additional adjustments were made at the elementary boundaries to incorporate some pieces of option 2 that helped out with demographics. One of them, notably, was the boundary that we had for Gage. What you'll see in the recommendation, I believe if it's not identical, it's very similar to what the Gage boundary was in option 2. And we wanted to make sure that we were not creating a racially identifiable school as we were going through that, and that's how we kind of took that change, that piece of option 2, and incorporated it into the recommendation. We also made some adjustments to the Pinewood Longfellow to decrease utilization at Pinewood and put some more students into the walk zone. The students zoned to Longfellow will have the option to opt out if they do not want to participate in the 45-15 calendar. And so now I'll turn it over to Matt to kind of go through the details of the recommendation. Matt, you're on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just getting unmuted there, switching screens. Thanks, Scott. We included the current boundary maps and all of the live-in enrollment, district-wide programs, total enrollment, facility utilization based on the current boundaries, the current free and reduced lunch percentage, just for comparison to the recommendations. And we can see here, we used, just to clarify, we use live-in enrollment. So it's the students residing in the boundary of that school, with the exception being any students that attend a district-wide option program. So that would be, for example, Sunset Terrace currently has 678 students in its boundary, but we know that number is likely higher because some students might attend Washington or Longfellow or be in the Gage Spanish Immersion programs. We also included some feeder charts so you can see currently what elementary schools feed into which middle schools at what percentage. So like to give an example, we have a situation at Gage currently where 4% of its boundary is splitting to Kellogg while the remainder goes to John Adams. And of course, currently with the middle and high schools, you have 100% feeders from middle to high school, but obviously with adding a 4th middle school, was not able to achieve keeping that 100%. So currently, All middle and high schools are currently over 90% utilization. 8 of 15 are currently over 90% utilization, obviously showing the need for some of the new construction at the elementary and middle schools. And we have 6 elementary schools that split when they feed into middle school. And in the recommendation, I believe we cut that number to 3. So, looking first at the elementary schools, you can see the shaded colors represent the recommended elementary boundaries from the advisory committee, and the green outlines show what the current boundaries are. So I may not go through every single change, but it allows you to generally see where the changes exist. Looking at the new Overland Elementary School, we take this portion of Sunset here that is currently east of 52, a large portion of the northeast area of the current Gibbs boundary, and a large chunk of the current Gage boundary. And this kind of illustrates that Gage boundary Scott was referring to that is pretty similar to what was shown in the original option 2, where that kind of core area around the current school and the current boundary remains there, but it extends into Churchill Hoover and the current Jefferson boundary. So we have a small piece of Riverside moving into Franklin, some of the southern portions of Pinewood moving to Bamber Valley. The new expanded Bishop moves further into Elton Hills, and to kind of offset that at Elton Hills, we move some areas of Churchill Hoover. As Scott mentioned, none of those programs change any buildings in this recommendation as far as the district-wide options that we had considered in some of the initial scenarios, and 75% of elementary students reside in the boundary of their closest school. That just kind of highlights where those change areas are, kind of calls them out in a little more detail. The other thing I forgot to mention was we currently have, you can kind of see them in this current boundary. At Bamber Valley, we have 2 sort of what we were calling island zones, one in the current Franklin zone and one in the current Riverside zone. And in the recommendation, we move those to what we would consider more of their neighborhood elementary school, moving this area here to Riverside, and the one that is in the current Franklin zone is really right next to where the Longfellow School is being built, so it made sense to move it to that school. So we have a smallish neighborhood boundary for Longfellow, a little bit under 300 students, but with the current enrollment at the 4515 program, it gets that school up to 580 students and about 81% utilized. You can see that boundary here, taking portions of the current Ben Franklin building, that Bamber Valley Island area, that little portion of Pinewood that Scott was referencing, and a small piece of Riverside as well. Moving on to the middle schools, we'll probably use the next map to explain these more, but you can kind of see here with the now the green outlines represent what those recommended elementary boundaries are, and then the different shaded colors show what the new recommended middle school boundaries are. So you can kind of see how each school feeds into, elementary school feeds into a middle school. So this red area here is the proposed John Adams boundary, and you can see it takes a portion of Bamber Valley. So Bamber Valley splits about 40% to John Adams, the entirety of the Falwell boundary, the entirety of the Bishop boundary, a portion of Sunset Terrace. It splits about 50-50 between John Adams and the new middle school, which is this green color up here. A portion of gauge, about 25%, with the remaining going to the new middle school, and all of the new Elton Hills boundary. Just to go through each of these kind of quickly, then Kellogg is made up of all of the proposed Churchill Hoover boundary, all of Jefferson, and all of Riverside Central. Willow Creek is then made up of that remaining piece of Bamber Valley, so about 60% of its boundary. All of Longfellow, all of Pinewood, and all of Franklin. And then the new middle school is made up of all of the new recommended Gibbs boundary, the new Overland Elementary boundary, that remaining portion of Sunset Terrace, and that remaining 75% of Gage. So those were the three schools that split. In this recommendation, 74% of middle school students reside in the boundary of their closest school. We have all middle schools under 90% utilization, at least the four boundary middle schools, with the range being from 76% to 86%, and the range of free and reduced lunch percentage from a low of 34% at John Adams to a high of 42% at Willow Creek. And again, this just kind of highlights the areas that are changing. This big portion here moving from Willow Creek to John Adams. Also a portion of Willow Creek moving to Kellogg. And this is the area of Riverside that currently splits to Willow Creek and Mayo. So we now have all of Riverside feeding 100% to Kellogg and Mayo. And then obviously this new Northwest Middle School taking a large portion of the current Kellogg boundary and the northern portion of John Adams.
Sorry, Matt. Riverside feeds to Kellogg and Century.
Oh, sorry. I said Kellogg and Mayo.
Yep.
Sorry. Thank you for clarifying. And then here, finally, is the recommendation on the high schools. So kind of similar to with the middle schools, these orange outlines now show those middle school boundaries we saw here. So like John Adams, this red color is now shown in kind of this orange outline. So again, you can kind of see how the middle schools feed into the high schools. So those are the middle schools again, and we have all of Kellogg and the all of Kellogg and 40% of the new middle school feeding into Century, which is that purple color. So all of Kellogg and this kind of northeast portion of the new middle school boundary. So the new middle school splits 40% to Century, 60% to John Marshall. And then John Marshall is also made up with 65% of the John Adams boundary. And then Mayo, again, is fed 100% from Willow Creek, and then the remaining 35% of John Adams. So we have two middle school splits, and 77% of high school students reside in the boundary of their closest school. Range of utilization is a low of 95% at John Marshall, and a high of 106% at Mayo, and basically pretty similar enrollments at Century and Mayo. Whereas previously, I believe we had around 90% at Century and over 120% in the Mayo boundary. And the range of free and reduced lunch from 31% at Mayo to 40% at John Marshall. Then again, here's just kind of highlighting those changes. I think overall, as Scott mentioned, there wasn't a large change at the high school levels. It was a more kind of feeder pattern driven based, and we only moved, I believe, about 250 high school students if everyone were, based on where they live today, and if everyone were to pick up and move to a new high school. And this map just kind of shows district-wide all three boundaries, so kind of what Scott was talking about in those previous maps, where we have the elementary boundaries in the different shaded colors, the middle schools in the orange colors, and the high schools in the purple. So you can kind of see here, maybe not so well right now, but where the middle and high schools overlap. So this would be the Mayo High School line, and you can kind of see here that this is all of the Willow Creek boundary, and then this is the portion of the John Adams boundary that feeds Mayo. So in total, 75% of all K-12 students reside in the boundary of their closest school. Overall, balance of socioeconomics is improved compared to current boundaries. We now only have one elementary school above 90% utilization, whereas as previously mentioned, we currently have 8. And no middle schools above 90% utilization. We didn't add any capacity to the high schools, so obviously we would kind of expect that all 3 high schools remain above 90% utilization. I won't go back through this now, but we just wanted to include a slide that kind of had all the numbers at all grade levels on one chart. So that kind of covered the mechanics of the recommendation, and I'll hand it back over to Scott now.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Just as far as community support, at our last meeting, we kind of took a straw poll at the end of the meeting to just see how everybody was in the committee, and at that point, everybody who was on that meeting did agree, either strongly or just agree. But what we wanted to do is just make sure that we had a mechanism to capture everybody's feedback. There are some people that just may not be as comfortable as others speaking up during these meetings. So we sent out a survey at the end where they could share their level of support and then provide us any comments about the recommendation, whether they agree or disagree, and then how the process went overall. Almost 90% of the committee respondents agree or strongly agree with the recommendation. So next. Just some other thoughts. There were some that were neutral or disagreed. This is something that came up early on in the process. I didn't want to dwell on it, but I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of it. There were concerns around only 2 of the 4 middle schools splitting at the high schools. This is kind of just based on the geography of where the facilities are. And all of the options that we developed, Willow Creek always fed 100% to Mayo. Kellogg always fed 100% to Century, and then John Adams and the new middle school ended up getting split. We had some discussions and some comments within the committee around the idea of a district-wide option middle school, creating continuity from the elementary school programs. We spent some time, internally analyzing this, and I just identified some challenges with it. If we're going to replicate the district-wide option elementary programs for the middle school grades 6 through 8, it's going to be cost prohibitive. We're going to have special programming, additional staff, those types of things. I think the idea with this is that we could have John Adams be that district-wide option middle school and have all of these students feeding into it. But in actuality, we can't force students to attend a district-wide option elementary school. We can't force students that attended that elementary program to continue at middle school. If they want to go back to the neighborhood school, they can, and there's no mechanism to force them to do so. And it would likely hinder the ability to balance demographics at the remaining middle schools, because we have kind of lower than the district average free and reduced lunch percentages at those district-wide option programs, and that would just propagate itself up into the middle schools. The concerns about the feeder splits will very likely be addressed if and when a 4th high school is built. So we didn't end up going anywhere else with this within the committee, but I just wanted to bring it up so that you guys are aware that this is a conversation that did occur. Just our overall thoughts on the process. This is feedback from the committee. They felt that it was a great process to be part of. Committee suggestions were listened to. The recommendation took many comments of the public into account. The boundary development was thoughtful. The process was fun. I'd love to be part of it again when if and when a new high school is built. Extremely positive process, but I think overall the committee was great to work with. They were engaged, they felt valued, they listened to each other, they worked well together. One last thing here, and John, if you want to chime in on this, we talked a little bit about exceptions. The district currently has policy around exceptions to attendance. This is the link for it. And if an exception is given, transportation is not provided by the district. So this is something that kind of came up throughout the process. John, did you want to add anything on that?
I think I would just say the superintendent will probably talk to the school board in a few minutes if they have questions about grandfathering, because that's probably at the top of people's minds, so he can address that.
Perfect. So next steps, again, changes take effect in the fall of 22-23. This presentation has been recorded. We have this pre-recorded, and there's a link to it on the project website. We have a new school locator, myschoollocation.com/RPS bounds. The original one is still there with the original options. This is a dedicated locator just for the recommendation. And, our plan is to, be available on the 1st if you have any additional questions as this becomes an action item. So at this point, that's our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. That was very thorough, and we appreciate the work you've done, the work that the committee has done. Board members have not been involved in the process at all, other than we have had a representative who has attended and just audited meetings without any kind of input, but just to see what's going on. And all of us who were able to attend were so impressed with the kind of objectivity of those involved, their commitment to making sure that the decisions they made were informed and equitable. It can be a very emotional experience, but we were really impressed with the process, so thank you for that. And I do have one question for you. This is going to come back to the board for a vote on June 1st. Between now and then, there will be folks who want to provide input. How likely is this plan to change because of that input?
At this point, this is the recommendation. John, Mike, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, I would say we've had multiple opportunities for people to provide feedback, and I know sometimes people don't pay attention when things are going on until all of a sudden they realize that they're going to be impacted by these changes. And if they want to submit their feedback, they can definitely send it to the superintendent. I would say it's very unlikely that we'll make definitely no major adjustments to the boundaries. I think we've had, like it's already been said, we've had a group of people that really were engaged and really did a nice job of thinking of everything and looking at all the feedback and trying to make adjustments based on the feedback. As mentioned earlier, there were focus groups where we received feedback, and we also had a community meeting where people were able to provide feedback. So at this point in time, not very likely that we would make any changes to the actual boundaries. I know there's some questions about grandfathering in. That's something that the district management team will spend the next month or so working through that. I can tell you our past practice has been when we've made boundary adjustments that we do allow students to finish their last year at that school if there's space. And with bringing on new schools, I don't think that should be an issue for having space, but we do want to spend some time as a district administrative team to iron out those processes for grandfathering students, and at a later date we can bring those back, not for vote, but to inform the board on how we will implement the boundaries that the board approves.
Thank you, and I think that does clarify, hopefully for the community, what this process is going to look like. So I appreciate that. Mr.
Yes, thank you. Very good presentation. I, however, found it interesting as I listened and reviewed the slide deck that when it came to the consistent comments in the area of community feedback, and I, of course, realized you couldn't include everything, But I just found it interesting that there's no mention of quality of education. You did open with what you discovered was, and it's probably true in every community, that parents and students love the schools that they're able to be a part of. True statement. And yet the community feedback concerns ranged from impact on home values, the effect it might have on siblings, and I just found that, again, interesting. There didn't seem to be, as I looked and reviewed the information, concerns about the quality of education. You know, whether my son, daughter, child attends this school, I just want to make sure that they receive a high quality education versus, you know, I want to make sure they attend this school or that school. Just an observation I want to comment. And then secondly, while it's true, you know, the public definitely has had its opportunity for input, this is really the board's first opportunity to actually see a finished product and to spend time, and I don't believe we'll be spending the rest of this evening talking about the recommendation, but we will have an opportunity, I'm sure, to really discuss and ensure that we fully support this recommendation, and I look forward to that opportunity to do so.
Ms. McLaughlin.
I just have a question related to one of the last items on the slide, mainly because it is a question that came up at the student school board meeting this week. I want to make sure that it's very clear on the district website that the link to see the locations for the recommendation is very clearly identified compared to what the options were. So that if people have looked at this previously and saw one thing, that it's very clear that what they're about to look at the website is going to be the current recommendation. I just want to make sure that that's absolutely clear to people so they're not looking at old information.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Director Amundson.
So early on in the discussion about boundaries and our priorities and values, I had stated that one thing that was important to me was to reduce wide discrepancies in free and reduced price lunch schools, so having one with a very low number and a very high number. Through the process, I've been able to learn a little bit about that, and that there are some definite advantages in keeping some schools high free and reduced price lunch, like a density, like a concentration of students at schools like that. And I'm sure I would not be very good at explaining that in such a way that would make a lot of sense to the public. So I was hoping, for the sake of other people like myself who might see that, who might be able to see that as a concern, that maybe somebody else would be able to address that in such a way that it would be easily understandable and allay other people's concerns. Is there someone who could do that for us?
I could try and tackle that for you if you wouldn't mind. So what you're talking about are two buckets of funding. One is state funding. It's called compensatory revenue, and it's calculated district-wide based on our free and reduced population. And then it is allocated to schools based on the free and reduced percentages at those schools. And so, you know, as a district, we might get $10 million, but $1 million of that might go to Gage, and 80,000 might go to Washington. And it's all based on the concentration level at that school. What we've done is is we've allowed our principals basically to buy more staffing with that money. And so if you walk into a school with a higher free and reduced price lunch percentage, they're going to have smaller class sizes, more staff available for students in those buildings because of that funding that they're getting. And so there was some concern in the committees, if we got these all perfectly even, we would probably experience staffing cuts at some of the schools that have a higher free and reduced price lunch percentage right now. The same goes with the other bucket, which is federal Title I. We're going to get an allocation from the federal government that's based on the whole district, and then we allocate the money to the elementary schools that have a higher than the district average free and reduced price lunch. So again, our Gage, our Franklin, Longfellow, so on and so forth, are going to get that extra federal funding to, again, buy more teachers, buy more staff, have smaller class sizes. So if we got too close to even all the way around, we would have some pretty significant adjustments in our staffing in our schools.
And can I take that another step down the road in translating all of that financial stuff to what actually creates equity? And you can tell me if I'm wrong. If we're assuming that students with free and reduced price lunch status may have additional needs, then concentrating them at one building will, or I mean more than one building, but concentrating them in each building allows us to take and leverage those extra dollars and reach the greatest number of students with those extra needs at a greater efficiency for the district.
I wouldn't even have anything further to say on that. I think that was said great.
Well, I think it's an important point for people to understand, and a concept that doesn't normally become evident without maybe being pointed out specifically. And I think it's important for our community to understand that we are not deliberately creating inequities among the schools out of a negligence or an uncaring about those inequities. We're deliberately creating those disparities between free and reduced price lunch numbers because it's an efficiency and because it allows us to serve those students better. And if anyone wants to jump in and correct me in any of those points, I would appreciate it.
Well, I agree with what you said, Melissa, but I also want to make it pretty clear to the public that boundaries aren't designed for that purpose. We have some of our schools, there's a lot of poverty in the neighborhood around that particular school. So obviously they're going to go to that school because that's one they can walk to. So that causes maybe a higher free and reduced percentage than another school that doesn't have that type of neighborhood. But for the advantages that you stated, that is true, but I just want to be clear that people don't misunderstand that we designed boundaries for that purpose. And then the other thing I will mention, Karen asked about the website. Actually, Heather has it ready to go once this meeting's over. They can go to rochesterschools.org/boundaries, and the updated recommendation that was presented to the board tonight will be there with that link where they can see, put their address in and see where they would land. So it's updated, ready to go, and actually it's live now as we speak. So it's updated on the website.
Thank you. Director Nathan, and then Director Barlow.
Thank you, Director Marvin. So building on the conversation that, and the excellent summary that Director Amundsen just gave, I also look at the community feedback, and it was a priority about having students go to their closest school. And if I read the numbers right, we were able to accomplish that for 75% of the students. Did I say the right number?
Correct.
Yes.
So if we were to balance the free and reduced lunch, we would have to probably not have 75% of the students go to their closest school, because we would have to be moving students around to populate different schools from different neighborhoods.
Yes.
We have a situation, a couple situations of that, which was corrected in this proposal. We called the Bamber Valley Islands, and they were neighborhoods over by Riverside and Longfellow that were made into Bamber Valley, and those kids were put on buses and driven over into Bamber Valley.
And
so
we've corrected that in this
and we've
version.
corrected that. That was a big priority of all three options. Every subgroup that worked on it thought that's not fair to those kids who have to drive by like 3-4 schools on their way to Bamber Valley.
And all right. Another demo. Go ahead, Dr. Marvin. I have one more question, but go ahead.
Go ahead. Now I'm just going to, you can finish.
So another demographic that we've heard about, but has not been reflected in the presentations, although I know that you talked about it a little bit when you talked about not wanting to identify a racially isolated school, is the racial and ethnic demographics of these schools. Can you talk a little bit about how that data did or did not play into setting the boundaries and why?
It did not play into setting the boundaries. We did not use race as a factor at all. After we kind of had the three options and we started developing the recommendations, Matt and I internally went through to just see if we had created any schools that were racially identifiable and to see whether or not we needed to correct that, and that is the extent to which we used it. The committee did not use it at all in their decision making.
Director Amundsen.
I just have a comment on the grandfathering issue, and I don't believe this has been a discussion with the board on whether or not that's something that we want to be able to weigh into or not, but I do believe that we gave our feedback on that early in the process. So while I won't object to the administration dealing with the grandfathering and exception to attendance issues, I would just want to state that if we do hear an awful lot from the community, from our stakeholders about that issue in the meantime, I may end up bringing it up again, despite what we're agreeing to tonight, because that's what I feel that my job is being a conduit of the community's concerns. So I wouldn't feel like I was doing my duty if we started hearing a lot of concerns and I didn't bring them up. So just sort of a forewarning that even though we're agreeing to allow the administration to address it, that doesn't mean that I will be silent if I see a concern.
Note taken, Ms. Amundsen, and as I think we discussed before, that's pretty much a management issue, and I know the consultants talked about that too, that how much grandfathering undoes the work of the committee. But I think Mr. Munoz said, we all heard that's going to be addressed after the decisions on the boundaries are made. So that's still coming, and I'm guessing that won't be completed probably until June sometime. Is that correct, Mr. Munoz?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Barlow.
I just had one additional comment regarding compensatory dollars and Title I dollars as it does relate to free and reduced lunches. I certainly don't want the public to think that, or anyone to be given the impression that, you know, if a student, and I'm trying to construct and convey this in a positive way, if Title I dollars and compensatory dollars were all that was needed to, if you will, close the gaps and to allow each of our students to experience a high quality education, then our data would be showing this, because boundary changes are not necessarily a tool to reveal that. Absent any change at all, we would still have the free and reduced lunch concerns. And for me, I guess I just want to restate our shared commitment to ensure that, irrespective of one's socio-economic background and what school they may or may not go to, or however this boundary may affect them, every parent, every child should expect and to believe that they will receive a high quality education, and that no trauma and or life situation will be used as an excuse or a barrier to prevent any child from having full access to every educational resource Rochester Public Schools makes available.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Are there any other comments or questions before we move on? Ms. Workman.
Yes, I see there being some potential inequities between students who would like to stay at their current school but don't have the transportation, as Superintendent Munoz referred to under exception to attendance. So I'd like to have, not now, but sometime soon, what the difference would be between exception to attendance versus grandfathering. My greatest concern are the 54 third graders who are currently not in a district-wide option school who would end up at Longfellow, and Longfellow is a choice program. So it seems to me that if there are students who do not want to be in the 4515 program and can't afford the transportation, or there's a barrier there, that maybe there needs to be some consideration by administration. I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just throwing that out there as one of my concerns.
Yeah, they are two different things. Exception to attendance has nothing to do with these boundary changes. Exception to attendance is, I live in the Gage neighborhood, but my child care lives in the Churchill. So I apply for an exception to attendance to attend Churchill because that's where my child care, that's one of the 4 reasons. Grandfathering is connected to the boundaries, and that's, like I said in the past, whenever we've made boundary changes, we've tried to allow a student to, if they only have 1 year left in that school, allow them to finish at that school instead of having to do 1 year at a new school. So the section of attendance, even though it was thrown out there tonight, it has nothing to do with the boundaries, even though more people may apply based, if their child care's now in this neighborhood, but they need to go to this school, but they're not the same thing. And there's 4 reasons that parents can use to apply for an exception to attendance, and that's approved out of Jackie's office. And the grandfathering is just the procedures that we will establish for implementing the boundaries that the board approves.
Okay, I apologize for misunderstanding, but you did mention exception to attendance, and that people are required to have their own transportation. Yeah. So that's why I think it would help the board if we had some real clear guidelines as to what your process is going to be to go through this, because I think it's certainly helpful to us to be able to understand the thought and rationale behind the decisions that you're making. So thank you.
When we bring that as an information item, we can share that with you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've had some good discussion on this, and I don't see any other hands, so I think we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which would be 7.05, closed session. This meeting will be closed at 7:44 p.m. as permitted by Minnesota Statute, Section 13D.05, Subdivision 3A, and is required to be closed in Minnesota Statute 13D.03 to discuss labor negotiations. And before we move ahead with that, Mr. Leopold, have I just stepped into the next item too quickly?
Oh.
Did you have any other comments?
No, thank you very much.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Appreciate it. So it is 7:45 p.m. and we are in closed session. effective January 2022. My thinking on that is that we elect a new chair in January, and I would like this to begin, for that stipend to begin when the new chair takes that position, beginning next year, not before.
I don't second that. I respect your I respect your sentiments towards that, Chair Marvin, but having seen the sheer volume of work that you do, and that this year especially has required, I cannot support your motion.
Well, that's hurtful.
But in a nice way, in the nicest way.
Well, can I ask a process question? So if Director Marvin makes the motion and it's seconded, it's because it's not necessarily your motion, right, Melissa? It's
not my motion.
Board's motion.
No.
Okay. So I'm going to second the motion to allow discussion.
Right. Now, that does not mean Melissa has to restate what she previously said. We remember that,
She does
right?
not.
Okay, thank you.
I will, however, speak in favor of the amendment because as Chair Marvin is the current chair and she's proposing something that actually works in her, against her self-interest, yeah, I'll just speak to that part. I agree. There's something about starting fresh with the beginning of a term.
I also would support the motion. Dr. Marvin continues to demonstrate true leadership, and she's doing so even in terms of this motion, and I appreciate that, and thank you.
Well, it's been moved and seconded. Oh, Ms. McLaughlin?
Sorry, it took me a second to get my hand up. I would speak against the motion primarily because I agree with Ms. Amundson that the amount of work that's been involved in this academic year, even as a new board member, I can see from following the earlier meetings that it's been such a significant increase in workload because of the issues that we've addressed this year, particularly the pandemic and the interim superintendent search, that I think that it's very much warranted, and it shows the value of the work of the chair.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those of you for the kind words. And I know this isn't exactly objective, but I would appreciate if you would accept this. I think I feel awkward. It's been my honor to do the work, and I just would feel better not accepting this at this time. I do think that the chair should be provided a stipend, and I would just feel better about the entire thing if we could just wait until next January, so whoever it is then could step into it, payroll would begin again, and just do it that way. But at this point, I think maybe we should just have the vote after Ms. Workman has something to say.
I do. I'm going to say I don't know if this is going to pass or if it will fail, if the motion to amend the resolution will fail. Just a reminder, we have an even number of people here tonight, so if it should be a 3-3 vote, then the amendment fails. And another suggestion to Chair Marvin is if it should not go the way that she would like it to, she always has the option of declining that increase and making arrangements with payroll to not get it.
Thank you, and that was my plan B. So Ms. Amundson, if you would call the vote on the amendment to the resolution.
I will. Director McLaughlin.
Aye.
Director Marvin.
Aye.
Director Nathan.
Aye.
Director Workman.
Aye.
Director Amundson, nay. Out of love. Director Barlow.
Aye.
Thank you. And the motion,
Director Garcia, who isn't with us.
thank you. The motion to amend passes. So at this point, if there is any more discussion, or if there is not any more discussion on the resolution, and Ms. Nathan has some discussion.
I do. On the first part of the resolution, and it sort of ties into the conversation we just had. Because one of the things that I was weighing in my mind was whether July 1st was the right start date, or whether actually beginning it at the beginning of the next term of the next school board members elected was the right start date. As I weighed that in my mind, I realized there's never a good time to get all of the board members on the same schedule of the increase. So if we waited until after the 2022 elections and began it then, the board members who were elected in 2020 would benefit from the increase while they were still in their term. So I'm in support of beginning it at the beginning of a fiscal year, which is what July 1st is, and not waiting till January, because there is no good time to find a different time that we're all going to be on the same schedule, except just picking a date.
Thank you. Director Amundson. You're muted, Melissa.
Thanks. Your proposal is to start at when, did you say?
I thought about proposing a different time, and one of the things I thought about was at the beginning of the term of school board members who would be elected in the 2022 elections, and then waiting to do the increase for everyone until that point. But there still would be members who weren't recently elected who would benefit from it.
And I just wanted to point out, while I'm open to those types of discussions, I wanted to point out that the dollar amount, we'd be losing yet another year in cost of living adjustment, and so then the dollar amount, again, we'd be losing ground on, I don't know what I'm trying to say, the inflation, the value, we'd be losing value yet again. So if there's a delay, I would also recommend examining the dollar amount of $16,000 to see what inflationary pressures on that number would be.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, my brain isn't communicating quickly tonight. It's just a cautionary thing, not an oppositionary thing, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Director Workman?
Yes, I would concur with Director Nathan for exactly the reasons that she mentioned. I know that some governmental bodies, the entire body is elected once or at once every 2 years, which makes it relatively simple. However, our three local governmental entities, us, the City Council, and Olmsted County Commissioners, have staggered re-election times. So I support the resolution as it is written.
Any other discussion? Ms. McLaughlin? And you're muted too.
I have one other proposed amendment for the second part of the resolution. Is it appropriate to address that now, or should we wrap up the discussion? Okay. I would propose that, given that we're looking at a different effective date, I made this statement at the last time we addressed this. I would propose that we increase the 1,600 to a 20% rather than a 10% increase of stipend for the chair. Again, recognizing the amount of extra work that's been involved this year, I can't imagine that that's going to change in the future. The diligence and time commitment and the value of that position, I would propose whatever the 20% of the 16,000 is. And just to be clear, I'd make that motion to modify 1,600 stipend for the chair I'm assuming it's 3,200. I'm not doing the math in my head.
Yeah. So Ms. McLaughlin has made a motion to amend second part of the resolution with the additional stipend of $3,200 annually would be paid to the school board member serving as chair. Is there a second to that motion? Well, it seems to me that then the motion fails for lack of a second.
And if I could just comment, I think that the sentiment is valid and could be looked at again in the future. The only reason that I wasn't able to support it is because of the research that we did into the practices of other districts, and I feel that they're much closer to the 10% ratio.
Are we ready to to vote on the amended resolution? I think so. And Clerk Amundson, have you captured the language, the changed language of the first? Right.
Of the first one, I could probably do it again. If you can do the second.
Well, and the second one, just changing the date to January 2022.
Now therefore be it resolved that the School Board of Independent School District number 535 does hereby approve increasing the stipend to $16,000 annually for each school board member effective July 1st, 2021.
Thank you. And then the second part, as was read before, be it further resolved, the School Board of Independent School District 535 does hereby approve an additional stipend of $1,600 annually to be paid to the school board member serving as chair effective January 1st, 2022. Yeah. Right.
That sounds right to me.
Okay. It's been moved, not as... Yeah, that was the amended resolution that has been approved. So, Ms. Amundson, will you call, Kathy, Nathan, you have a question, and then Ms. Amundson will call the roll.
All right, so we have amended the resolution and we're having final discussion on the resolution before we vote, right?
It's already been
amended.
It's been moved, seconded, and amended, correct?
Right. Okay. So I guess before I vote, I'm not going to speak for other school board members, but I can say I'm uncomfortable with voting for an increase in my own stipend. I haven't decided what to do with that increase and whether I would accept it or not. However, for future board members, I think it's important that now we make it clear to our community the value of the work that we do deserves to be compensated, and that for individuals who are thinking about running for school board, that it is something where your time is valued with some compensation, although it probably doesn't compensate for the amount of hours we all put into the work. But in order to align ourselves with, and I think the research that Director Workman and Director Amundson have done about what other districts do for school board members, I think it's been well researched and well documented. And I hope it encourages more and more diverse candidates to be candidates for school board in the future. So that's why I would support it.
And Ms. Amundson.
And I echo much of what Director Nathan said, and I would add it was based on data and logic, and we are still quite the bargain compared to city council and county commissioners. But again, I think the forward-looking nature of this increase to make sure that we attract school board candidates from diverse backgrounds, that's my motivation. I'd also point out that there's lots of great education charities that we could direct contributions to, foundations and so on. So,
absolutely. All right, I think we're ready to vote. Ms. Amundson, will you call the roll?
I will. Director Marvin?
Aye.
Director Nathan?
Aye.
Director Workman?
Aye.
Director Amundson? Aye. Director Barlow?
Aye.
Director Garcia? Director McLaughlin?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. Next, we will go to 8.02, Policy Committee recommendations, and my understanding is the Policy Committee is going to cover a number of policies and procedures during this time. So I will turn it over to the Policy Committee.
Yes. So we've been busy, and the agenda has each of the policies in separate agenda items, but I'm going to walk through a summary of all of them together, and then maybe ask if you have any questions to hold them till the end, and then we can go back to individual ones if there are questions. So, policy 413, harassment and violence. The purpose of this policy is to maintain a learning and working environment that is free from harassment and violence on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, national origin, sex, age, marital status, familial status, status with regard to public assistance, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or disability. Significant portions of the policy were updated by our legal counsel in response to changes in federal regulations, and we added procedure language to reference a new procedure 413A. There is an additional edit to the version that you see in your board docs, and this is to remove the word including before the phrase gender identity and expression in multiple places in the document. That was something that was approved by our legal counsel. 413A is a procedure. It is the harassment and violence report form, and this procedure was created, and a form is now used to report incidents of harassment and violence, and that form is now in this procedure 413A. Policy 414 is the mandated reporting of child neglect or physical or sexual abuse. The purpose of this policy is to make clear the statutory requirements of school personnel to report suspected child neglect or physical or sexual abuse. The changes include a summary of the policy in the employee handbook and provides for annual staff review, identifies a point of contact for questions on mandated reporting procedures, and procedure language is added to reference procedure 414A. There's also some additional edits to 414 that are in the last section regarding dissemination of policy and training, and it just more explicitly lays out where the policy can be found in the employee handbook and who the contact person is for the policy. 414A is a procedure, and it has the new forms from Rochester Public Schools and the Minnesota Department of Education to report student maltreatment. So the new forms replace the old forms. Policy 415 is mandated reporting of maltreatment of vulnerable adults. The purpose of this policy is to make clear the statutory requirements of school personnel to report suspected maltreatment of vulnerable adults. The reporting process for the mandated reporter was updated, and the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Center contacts were specified. We also included the same changes to the dissemination of policy and training section about where the policy was located in the employee handbook. and who the point of contact was for mandated reporting procedures. 50302, attendance areas. We wanted to review this policy to ensure that it was in line with our process of setting the boundary adjustments. And the only change was to change the word choice to district-wide option to more accurately reflect the language we're using in the district. 806, crisis management. The purpose of this policy is to act as a guide for school district and building administrators, school employees, students, school board members, and community members as to how to address a wide range of potential crisis situations in the school district. The changes in this policy included the timeline for updating the crisis plans, incorporating language that referred to our new emergency notification systems that we're installing in our buildings, employee training on safe schools training modules, specification that we're using the avoid, barricade, and counter method to respond to an active threat, update to lockdown procedures and drills and the number of drills to be conducted annually, and how to resume normal school routines after a crisis by the crisis intervention team. Policy 904 is the distribution of materials on school district property by non-school persons. The purpose of this policy is to provide for distribution of materials appropriate to the school setting by non-staff and non-students on school district property and through online platforms in a reasonable time, place, and manner, which does not disrupt the educational program nor interfere with the educational objectives of the school district. Most of the changes, and these changes came from our legal counsel, address adding electronic and online platforms for the distribution of these materials. When the policy was originally written, it was thought of as printing a flyer and putting it up on a wall or passing it out. And of course, we now know we have electronic means to do that. So the changes in the policy reflect that. And then items were added to the list of materials that are always prohibited. So there are 9 additional categories of materials that would not be allowed to be distributed either physically or electronically through district means. And finally, 904A, distribution of material on school district property by non-school persons is the procedure that implements the policy, and it corrected the title and added designee as a source for approval of materials. It had a process and a timeline for review, approval, reconsideration, and communication of approval of materials, and it added language on costs associated with the distribution of any materials. Those are the policies we're briefing this evening. In 8.03 through 8.11. Any questions on those? Good. So now I'll move on to item 8.12, which is the...
Director,
oh, sorry.
Director Amundson had a question.
I had a comment. Can I just recognize Director Nathan's leadership in a lot of detail-oriented work with adding procedures and getting things consistent. It's been mostly Director Nathan and the staff members related to each of these policies who have put in a lot of work.
Thank you. And Director
I
McLaughlin.
appreciate my members of the policy committee.
Thank you.
Dr. McLaughlin.
I just have something really minor related to agenda item 8.10 that I just want to make sure that I'm wondering if the agenda is just missing a word, that this is a proposed revised policy 806 and not a new policy.
You are correct. It is a revised policy.
Okay, I just want to make that clarification.
Yep.
Good catch.
Okay. Right, so these will come back at our next meeting. Agenda item 8.12 is a proposed new policy, Director McLaughlin, and it is the equity policy that we've been talking about for a little bit. We've been working on this for a long time, and it started when Director Seelinger was on the board, and then Director Workman joined the effort, and then Director Marvin joined the effort, and now Director Amundsen has joined the effort through people's rotations on the policy committee. We would not be here without the work of some of our staff of color from the district. Our previous equity coordinator, Shavana Talbert, our current equity coordinators, our employee of color resource group leaders have been essential to helping us take ideas and concepts that are maybe new to what we've documented in policy, and helped us understand them and understand the need for them, and help us put it in language that really reflects accurately the areas of work. We've also had great feedback from our students in developing the policy and in providing us feedback for the policy, so we really appreciate that. I wanted to start by just talking about policy, because we've gotten the question, why do we need an equity policy? So I want to remind everybody that in our school board policy 208, formal guidelines are necessary to ensure the school community that the school system responds to its mission and operates in an effective, efficient, and consistent manner. A set of written policy statements shall be maintained and modified as needed. Policy should define the desire and intent of the school board and should be in a form which is sufficiently explicit to guide administrative action. So that's really our North Star in writing the equity policy. And I'm not going to go through each section of the policy, but I'll point out that Section 1 has a purpose that dovetails with the purpose of policy, but specific to our equity work. And one of the things I wanted to highlight as we look through this policy draft language, and I would welcome any feedback on the language, but realizing that the question we get is what happens to the policy. So you approve a document, and then what does the district do? Well, the superintendent has said this many times, and I think the board has confirmed it. The district has not been waiting to do equity work until the board was able to formulate and get feedback on the policy. The board has passed 3 statements. You are welcome here, the equity beliefs, and then the recent government speech resolution to support the purpose and the intent that is reflected in this policy. The superintendent and staff has been working with our Midwest and Plains Equity Center to merge our strategic plans in the area of equity and access. And we've had 2 reports from that group to the board, and we're going to have another one in July once they're finished with that process and they have action plan and metrics and a communication plan. We had a conversation last year at our budget meeting where the board expressed an intent to want to devote more resources to our equity work. And the superintendent came back with a 3-year plan that involved hiring a number of employees, and that came to fruition tonight when we announced the hiring our executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And over the past year, we've seen the hiring of our equity coordinators and more equity specialists, and looking at the role of the bilinguals and how they can be supported. So I just want to point out to the community that this isn't the starting point of our equity work. It's a codification of the pillars of our equity work that will allow the board to go back and review the work that we're doing against a set of standards. And the standards are what are established in the equity policy. And the equity policy provides for at least annual review of the policy as well as periodic review of metrics and data and outcome information that we can use to measure whether the work we're doing in equity is the work that we need to do to achieve our positive outcomes for our students. So given that, I will take any questions.
Ms. Amundsen.
Director Nathan, I was only part of this at the very tail end, but my understanding is that there was a lot of thought and input given to the wording, the word choices of the majority of the content of this policy. So while a board member or a community member may say, wouldn't it be better to say it this way? In essence, it's been reviewed multiple times by multiple groups and consensus has been reached as to word choice and that type of content. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's also been reviewed by legal counsel as well.
So that all that is to say, you know, I may look at it and say, well, that's not the way I would have put it, but I'm choosing to defer to the multiple groups that have reviewed this and their consensus in the word.
This was, I think, and I don't think I'm overstating it here, the absolutely most inclusive process we have ever followed to construct a policy. And it may change. I mean, policies change, but it involved an enormous number of people, many different iterations, feedback, push and pull, but it has been incredibly inclusive. And I know there are two other people who want to speak too, but I'd say also I think it's quite educational. It has an amazing glossary of terms so that people who are interested in the terminology often used in equity documents, it's right there. Go ahead, Ms. Workman, and then Mr. Barlow, and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Yeah, I think, Chair Marvin, you really touched on what I was going to say, that this document is not solely the work of the policy committee. I looked at myself. I can't speak for the others who've been involved in this work, who've been on and off the policy committee during this time, but I looked at my own role as a facilitator for people to be able to share their words, their experiences, their views, and that basically what we did, okay, now I'm speaking for everybody, was to synthesize it, put it back together, send it back out, and then back and forth to a number of groups throughout the community, and that did include a student group. So their perspectives were certainly extremely valuable. I learned a lot in the process, and I really think that that's the purpose of many of our policies, and this one in particular, is to really inform people as clearly as we possibly can what the intention of the district is as we continue to move forward with the work that we have already begun and has been underway for quite some time. So, Director Nathan, I'm very happy that you spoke to that as well, because it's an important facet of the work.
Thank you. Mr. Barlow, and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Equity, be it in the form of policy or practice, oftentimes has fallen to those individuals who have the lived experience or have had the impact of injustice, if you will, or inequity face to face. And the thing for me regarding this particular policy, but more than just the policy, those who have worked hard to bring this policy forward, is that it's a result of a journey, okay, where there was a willingness to learn, a willingness to acknowledge and be uncomfortable okay, to maybe think differently and say, well, maybe there's a point, well, not maybe, going beyond maybe there's a point, and realizing there is a point there. And with responsibility, also known as privilege, there is opportunity. And so I appreciate this opportunity, this step forward, that sends a strong signal to our students, our staff, our community. Often I'm asked, well, what's the big deal regarding equity? How come it's necessary? And I shouldn't say it that way, because I don't want to minimize where people may be or their degree of being, and I don't want to use the word woke, though I just did. It comes down to, I think, policies such as this that are clearly stated, passionately crafted, and then presented with the possibility of what can be. And so I'm thankful to be a part of a board that is coming to realize this. I know this is presented as a briefing item, and as much as I would like to move it to action, I think we want to also give the community an opportunity. We want to hear from them, okay? We want to be respectful of those who may not at this point get it, who may sincerely want clarification. What do you mean by this? And why is this necessary? And we're willing to stand by this policy, and if need be, you know, develop it even further along with you. Not without you, but along with you. And so, again, to those who've worked and will continue to work, and to those who are now a part of the responsibility, Will Ruffin, Director of DEI, there's work to be done, and we're going to do this together. And so, again, thank you, Kathy, Policy Committee, the work you're doing. And this is worth the wait. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin.
I just want to echo and applaud the work that's been done here, that I know it's been a long time coming. And I think it's really a reflection of the work that the district has been doing all along, that formalizing it this way, and what Chair Marvin said about such an inclusive process, I think it's a great example of what I understand the district wants to do moving forward. And particularly, you know, recently coming out of the interview process for the interim superintendent, the board was very focused in our questions and our deliberations about equity issues, and it's at the forefront of our mind. It's the forefront of education. I think it's something that perhaps a community member who doesn't follow the district very closely might not understand how important that is to the district. And I think this policy defines that and formalizes it, and also gives us a way to respond to questions from individuals who perhaps either don't follow our work as closely or don't understand this important mission of the district, that it gives us something to refer them to, as was said earlier, as an educational tool, so that everyone can be on the same page of what this school district and what's important to us.
Thank you. Director Amundson.
And I know that Director Nathan already referred to all of the people who have gone before, but I want to call out specifically our former school board member, Deborah Seelinger, for her passionate support of equity and moving this policy forward. And I will defer to the other board members who worked on this longer to recognize anybody else that really needs to be recognized, who may not be with us any longer.
That was a good recognition. And Ms. Nathan, I think you have the last word.
Well, I thank you for teeing that up for me, Dr. Amundson, because the other group that I didn't thank was our cabinet. They also took a look at the policy, because policies are designed to be implemented. And the weight of implementing it is on the shoulders of our cabinet, our superintendent, and our building leadership, our teachers. And the cabinet really took a very close eye to taking some concepts that needed to be addressed and helping us put it in language that would be used, right? I mean, we don't want just language that make a statement. We want language that's going to guide action. And their feedback was really instrumental at a pivotal time that I really think this makes a policy that will guide action. So I appreciate their work.
Thank you. And again, this will come back. We can't approve policies when they're presented, so this will come back for approval in the consent agenda at the next meeting. We'll move on then to other business. Board members, do you have any items that you want to be considered for a future agenda? Mr. Barlow?
Yes. I was contacted earlier this afternoon and was asked regarding, well, when are we going to meet in person? And I said I didn't know, and I just wanted to maybe have that as a item of future discussion.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And I can tell you that the last time that Vice Chair Nathan and the superintendent and I met, the consensus we sort of came to was the second meeting in June. Our schools are going to be, the staff and students will be masked through the end of the school year. And which would include the first meeting in June. Part of the problem going back face-to-face now is that if the board goes back face-to-face, then we need to be able to include the community, large numbers. And anyway, at this point, we're looking at the second week in June when the situation and guidance may have changed, may not have changed, but we'll see how things go. Anyway, we'll keep you updated, but good question. And I didn't give you a good answer at all.
Oh, you did. You did.
Oh, well, thanks, Don. Director Workman.
Yeah, I think Director Amundson and I have had some fairly extensive conversation about the process that we went through in the interim superintendent selection. And it's not anything that is super major, but things that would help to streamline the timeline to give us more opportunity, for example, to check references and so on. And so sometime in the next month or 6 weeks, I think it would be helpful for us to have this discussion because we will be starting a superintendent search in the not too distant future. And I'd like us to all to be on the same page. So be thinking about what you thought went well and where you think improvements could be made, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a really fruitful discussion about that.
Excellent. Anything else? All right. Hearing no other suggestions, it is 8:50 p.m. and we are adjourned.